are recording. Hello and greetings, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. We pray that you will be richly blessed as you hear the words of Yahuah and his covenant calendar out of the mouth of our instructors this evening. But before we get started, we'd like to unmute our mics and just give you a big hello blessing. Shall we, everyone?
Hello.
Hello.
Shalom, everyone. Shalom.
Welcome.
Hello.
And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the conversation over to our instructor, Timothy Asselford. Go ahead, brother.
Thank you very much, Mario. We got quite the study tonight. It's loaded. There's a lot of material to get through. And there's a lot of details that's going to be a challenge. So we're going to need to keep our ears open. This is a great study. I want to thank Charlene for all the work that she has done to help me out with this. It would be nothing like it is without her, and I thank Yahuah for her. I hope you guys can understand this. This study is kind of my baby. I've been working on this for a long time, off and on, and redoing it many times. So I hope you guys are able to understand what I have to say tonight. Okay, let's go. Joshua enters Canaan, and it's the Covenant Calendar Club here tonight. This is we're going to be looking at the first Passover in Canaan with Joshua, from chapters 3 to 5, and we're going to be concentrating on the observation of first fruits. There are many details in this study that are necessary to fully understand today's study. The first Joshua study proves, number one, Abib 14 Passover occurred on a H7676 weekly Shabbat, or we can say on a seventh-day Sabbath. That might surprise some people, but the scriptures is full of surprises when we sit down and study it. Number two, the Wave Sheaf Festival celebrated first on the morning of Abib 15. And number three, the Unleavened Bread Festival was celebrated secondarily on Abib 15. And you might wonder why we worded it like this, but I think you're going to see why after this study is done. This is only part one, and we're expecting 2 more parts, quite sure, maybe even a 4th one. We'll see what becomes of it. A simple sickle's eternal authority. Now those words are picked out with extreme precision and purpose. The sickle has an eternal authority, and we probably won't see it on this first part, but it will come together when it's all done. The Wave Sheaf sickle exposes the Enoch forgery. Part 1, mapping the discussion topics. Part 1 is understanding Yahuah's instructions for entering Canaan. Second part, or 1.1, is Passover in which month? Everybody knows that Passover is in the first and the second month, so why then are there so many questions about it? But the real question is, what month did Joshua observe his Passover in Canaan? And Passover on which cycle? What cycle of the week was the Passover on? Well, I just told you it was on the 7th-day Sabbath, but we're going to see the proof of this. And the day after Passover, and we're going to see some interlinear and Septuagint support on that topic. And YAHusha's antitype aligns with Torah types for Wave Sheaf. Yahuah's eating prohibition command. This is a very, very interesting command, and it's going to really, really hit home. Probably more so in the second part coming up, but we are going to see some of it in this first part. We're going to be looking at the Hebrew definitions for Rashit, which is first. We're going to be looking at Hebrew definitions for Eketzir, or Eketzir, however it's said, or cutting. You're going to see this quite a bit in this study. Yes, there's going to be repetition in this study, but there's a reason for it. And we're going to see the summary of Hebrew definitions for Rashit and Iketzir at the same time. And also 1.9, we're going to see the wave sheaf grain offering. And the second part of this study, we're going to see why the cutting and eating of the grain cannot be separated. Clarification of terms for this study. Number one, corn. Another term for grain of any kind, and it's not to be confused with our usual thoughts, corn in the cob. That's not what it's talking about. Number two, old grain. Grain from the year before, stored in a vessel. Very important that we realize these definitions and stick by them. Number three, roasted grain or parched grain. That's dried or cooked grain. Number four, new grain or fresh grain. And that is grain harvested after Passover in the new year from a winter crop seeding. And dough. Really? Dough is in the scriptures? It is a mixture of ground grain, oil, and salt for the altar of sacrifice, the grain offerings, and also for consumption of unleavened bread during the unleavened bread festivals. And finally, number six, fine grain. This is important. This is extremely important. Fine grain can only be wheat flour. Barley can only be ground into coarse flour, and yet the scriptures demands fine flour. Interesting stuff. Will Joshua accurately fulfill Yahuah's statutes upon entering Canaan? Now the question, will the Qumran Dead Sea Scroll priestly course-based calendars accurately reflect Yahuah's statutes for entering Canaan? Now I want to say here, the 364-day year and the fixed festival calendar, they are based on the priestly courses that we find in the scriptures. This is what we're going to be examining and looking at very, very, very closely. The Qumran, Enoch, Zadokite, and Essene calendars are all based on the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls. Each incorporate the 364 cycles per year format. These calendars are based on the 24:2 priestly courses, and they are found within the book of the law. Note carefully, this three-part study was derived from careful examination of Rachel Elior's research into the Qumran scroll base and other various sources as well. Rachel Elior is considered worldwide as a very knowledgeable source when considering the Qumran scrolls. The primary inquest of these studies is to ascertain if the 364 cycles per year with the fixed feast dates as outlined in Enoch, Zadok, and the Essene calendars will find any linear alignment with the tremendously accurate documentation found in the divinely inspired scriptures. That's a long sentence, so you might have to go back and read that one again carefully when you look at this study once more. These studies are not here to delineate each and every difference between these three named calendars. The strict focus is the 364 cycle year and the fixed dates of their priestly course-based festal calendar in comparison to the scriptures. Now, if you don't understand this statement I just made, we are going to be describing this and visually showing you coming up in the slides. So I'm hoping that you will understand better then. Another source for quotes, the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran and the Concept of a Library. And this is edited by Sidney White Crawford and Cecilia Wasson. The other documentation to consider, Part 3, Collection of Articles by Stephen Phan, The Ancient Library or Libraries of Qumran, The Spectre of Cave 1Q. As to calendar, the 364-day solar calendar embedded in the Book of Jubilees, found in caves 2Q and 11Q, and again at Masada, and in the temple scroll, set the standard. I'm going to mention that again. They set the standard, and you're going to see this as we go through. This calendar disregards the moon and has a Pentecontad festal cycle that observes a number of non-biblical feasts, more than doubling the total number. And the next quote, paleographically, the manuscripts date from the 2nd century BCE until the first half of the 1st century of the Common Era. These scripts are quite varied in style and in execution. And I would like you to please note when he says that these manuscripts come from. It says the manuscripts date from the 2nd century BCE. Julian Morgenstern seconds that motion, and he documents that quite well also. Does it appear these documents belong to the Enoch that was the 7th generation from Adam? I need you to think about that question very carefully. If I wanted you to believe something, wouldn't it be best that I put the name with the highest regard on it to associate it with that document so that people would believe it? Just a thought. Note carefully, in your reading of either and or Enoch, Zadok, or Essene, remember, they use the same priestly course basis, the same 364 cycles per year, and the same fixed feast calendar. The next slide provides information from a YouTube promoting the Zadok calendar. This is one of the calendars derived from the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Qumran caves. However, this study will use Enoch as the general term to include all 364 cycles per year calendar. Joshua's event of entering Canaan will be compared to the declarations of the calendars based upon the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls. The question is, will the Zadokite calendar find scriptural alignment within the event for Joshua entering Canaan? Or will there be glaring discrepancies? Joshua's Passover will be on a weekly 7676 Shabbat, as already proven in former research. And you're going to see how that works very well tonight. Here's the original slide. This is the promotion for the Zadok calendar. You'll see up in the upper left-hand corner. This is their original slide, and we're going to be working from this right here. There is your first month and your second month and your third month. Note the exact repeating nature of the dates. See, if you take month 1, it's exactly the same in month 4, 7, and 10. And 2 is exact same dates for your 7th-day Sabbaths on month 5, 8, and 11. And so on with month number 3, it carries on. This calendar is mathematically precise, but are these Sabbath stipulations found in covenant Torah? I want you to think about this very carefully. Those dates that is declared to be 7th-day Sabbaths, are we going to find those in covenant Torah? Where is the first month that has a H7676 Shabbat on the 14th cycle of the month? Here's a question. Why are these bullets in red? And we're going to have some comments on the next slide on those next statements on this Zadok calendar slide. Let's look at it. We're going to be comparing these Zadok calendar claims. Now, day 4, they claim is the creation of time, and they claim it is the first month of the first year. Then we see day 4, or day 5, 6, and 7. We're going to look at Abib 1, or New Year's Day. And they claim it must always fall on the 4th day of the week. Yes, they claim every year must begin with the 4th cycle of the week. Are we going to find that in Scripture? And down at the bottom, the first Sabbath of the year and each season must occur on the 4th day of the new month. Another one, are we going to find that in the Scriptures? This is what we're going to be looking for. So the question I have right now is, if we look at days 1, 2, and 3, they're not counted. They count their time starting with day 4. So how is it that day 1, 2, and 3 are not counted, unaccountable? And I ask you, is there anything that Yahuah did that is unaccountable? How can days 1, 2, and 3 have no meaning? If they have no meaning and are unaccountable, why are they written in the Scriptures? If time began on day 4, and if time begins every year on day 4, have a look at where your Sabbath comes in. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 days of the week, and now the 7th day Sabbath is on the 4th day of that week. Does that make any sense? Have we had 7 weekdays to have or have we had 6 weekdays so that we can have a 7th day Sabbath? No, it doesn't work. Didn't work like that at creation. According to what they claim, Sabbath would have been on the 4th day of the first week. Is that what we see in the Scriptures? The following points will be under close examination: Joshua's first Passover, the Wave Sheaf, and Unleavened Bread Festival in Canaan. The main purpose of this study is to ascertain which cycle of the week did Joshua observe the Passover in the land of Canaan? And B, what cycle of the week was New Year's Day in that same year? Will this align with the Enoch Zadok calendars? And C, did Joshua abide by the Enoch Zadokite Essene or a lunar-based calendar, or neither of them? Why is it so important to know which cycle of the week the Passover fell upon in the event of Joshua entering Canaan? Because the rabbis say that certain festivals cannot land on the weekly 7676 Shabbat. And Passover is one of these festivals they claim this to be. What do the Enochian calendars claim about this? The priestly course-based calendars claim the festivals are always on the exact same cycle of the week every year. Will Enoch try to claim Joshua's Passover must be in the 2nd month of the year? Have you heard that? I have heard it many times. The investigation begins here. Primarily, a review of Yahuah's commands that directly address the entrance into Canaan by the Hebrew nation. Secondly, Yahuah's statute instructions will be placed like a translucent paper over these priestly calendar acclamations. Final conclusive evidence will be gathered from this question. Will these priestly calendar stipulations fulfill the commands of Yahuah without deviating from Moshe's writings or from Yahuah's statutes? This is what we need to understand today. Section number 1, understanding Yahuah's instructions to enter Canaan. Passover, in which month? First, we're going to look at Yahuah's provision for men who were defiled and could not observe the Passover in the first month of Abib. Second, we'll have a close look at the statute commands that were commanded by Yahuah through Moshe for Joshua to execute with extreme precision. In Numbers 9, certain men were inquiring of Moshe why they could not observe the Passover and requested a solution to this problem. Why? They were defiled by handling the dead body of a person. And Moshe said to them, stand still, and I will hear what Yahuah will command concerning you. And Yahuah spake unto Moshe, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if any man of you or of your posterity shall be unclean, number 1, by reason of a dead body, or number 2, be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto Yahuah. What were Yahuah's 2 points that could give permission to observe an alternate Passover in the second month? Number 1, if any man of you or of your posterity shall be unclean by reason of a dead body. Number 2, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto Yahuah. When? Numbers 9:11. The 14th day of the second month, between the evenings they shall keep it, and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. There once again we see the 14th day with precision. Now let's go back to Joshua entering Canaan. Was Joshua and all Israel defiled by a dead body? No. Were they on a far-off journey? No. They were at the place of their new home. The tabernacle and family was near, their home was mobile. They did not have any legal reason to observe the Passover in the second month, not according to the commands of Yahuah. Remember, when a second month Passover was acceptable, the instructions are very clear. You'll see that in 2 Chronicles 30, verse 2, 13, and 15. These scriptures say nothing about Joshua observing Passover in the second month. It has been suggested that there is a 1 month time frame for Joshua staying in Gilgal prior to the Passover. This in turn would have moved the Passover to the alternate second month. Yet it is not written in the scriptures. And the sons of Israel encamp in Gilgal and make the Passover on the 14th day of the month at evening in the plains of Jericho. So I ask, shall we add in a suggested 1 month time frame, or shall we accept what is written? Yahuah said, I have rolled away the reproach of Mitzrayim from you. The word for rolled is 1556 Galal, hence the name Gilgal. Now this is an interesting title. Is the first month really the first month? Might sound like a silly question, but it's not, because we get questioned on this regularly. And the people came up from the Yarden on the 10th day of when? Of the first month. And they camped in Gilgal on the west side of Jericho. In Exodus 12:2, the Israelites were commanded to choose their lamb on the 10th cycle of the first month. Here Yahuah himself followed his own set pattern and chose his people on the 10th of the first month. Yes, Joshua's Passover was in the first month. And let's have a look at these Sabbaths because of what Enoch and Zadok claim. Look at month number 2. Do we see a 14 in there? No. Is there a weekly Shabbat on the 14th cycle of the second month of Enoch? No, there's not. So when we show you that Joshua's Passover was on a seventh-day Sabbath, this shows that it could not possibly have been on the second month of the Enoch calendar. So that eliminates that factor altogether. That brings us back to the first month. Where is the first month that has a H7676 Shabbat on the 14th cycle of the month? We see that in month number 3. Not once in scriptures, never once, is Passover mentioned as being in the third month. Interesting. Another problem for Enoch. Looking at the third month of the 364 fixed feast calendar, we see that the third month is the first month to have a seventh-day Sabbath on the 14th of the month. This is a great problem for the ones who desire to claim that Joshua's Passover was not in the first month, but on the second month. Their argument has just been vaporized by their own calendar. So this brings us back to month number 1. But interestingly, I do not see the 14th date for a Sabbath in that month. This is going to be a problem. Let's look for it. What month cycle did Yahuah allow for the harvest of the fresh grain to begin? Was this connected to circumcision? Interestingly, Yahuah timed the circumcision of the men to immediately follow the entering the land on the 10th with abundant grain ready to harvest. The men, needing rest, time to heal, would not be in any condition to harvest the wheat. Yahuah knew that after eating manna for 40 years, the temptation for consuming the wheat would be absolutely unbearable. Was the circumcision a dual accomplishment which staved off their great desire to harvest and eat the grain prematurely? And I say prematurely, I mean before the statute allows. Yahuah knew the harvest would begin immediately following the healing of the men. And Yahuah, in compassion, had no intention to tempt them by withholding wheat from them through the week of unleavened bread. That might seem like a strange sentence to you. I'm going to read it one more time. Yahuah, in compassion, had no intention to tempt them by withholding wheat from them through the week of unleavened bread. Remember this sentence, because this is going to come up very, very, very strong further on in this study tonight. Section 1, understanding Yahuah's instructions. Passover, on which cycle? What unfaltering factor determines which cycle of the month the Passover must be observed on? Leviticus 23:4. These are the feasts to Yahuah, holy convocations which you shall call in their seasons. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evening times, is Yahuah's Passover. On the 15th day of this month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Yahuah. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. So there is a very definite difference between the 14th and the 15th. Passover explained. Leviticus 23 stipulates Passover on the 14th cycle of the first month. Numbers 9 allows for Passover on the 14th of the second month, if necessary. Leviticus 23:5 is just one of numerous examples showing that Yahuah commands the Passover to be observed on the 14th of the first month, Eve. Not once in the scriptures does Yahuah declare or command a specific cycle of the week in which the Passover must be observed. I'm going to read that one more time. Not once in the scriptures does Yahuah declare or command a specific cycle of the week in which the Passover must be observed. Yet the question, should we deviate from these commands? Passover the 14th is declared by Enoch Zadok calendar stipulations to be permanently fixed to the third cycle of the week. Should we unquestionably accept such an imposition to the scriptures? To understand according to statute upon which cycle of the week the Passover occurred in Joshua's account upon entering Canaan, Yahuah's statute commands involving the wave sheaf observance will take preeminence and give clarity for Abib 14. Joshua enters Canaan. And the people came up from the Yarden on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the west side of Jericho. As we study, please consider, why did Yahuah not require specific cycles of the week documentation for Passover, but instead make certain of the recording of the dates within the Shaneh years? Why is that? Cycles of the week versus dates. There is a huge difference, and you're going to see the reasons for this. No cycle documentation, but a date. Why then does Enoch and Zadok demand a specific cycle of the week for Passover? Pretty good question, I think. Joshua refrained from documenting a specific cycle of the week, but confidently recorded the date. You see it there, the 14th day of the month at evening on the plains of Jericho. At evening, there's Erev, and that is the mixture of light and darkness. Look, next section here, the day after Passover and the Septuagint interlinear support. And this verse, and they eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow of the Passover, unleavened things and roasted corn in this selfsame day. We need to become very, very acquainted with this verse. This verse is absolutely loaded with information. Loaded. Ultra-specific note. Yes, the Israelites were eating the grain of the land on the cycle immediately following the Passover. And please note how I emphasized eating. This is very, very, very important. Joshua 5:10 has just mentioned the time context of the Passover on the 14th of the month. The cycle of the week can now be easily determined. Many emphatically declare the Septuagint does not say in Joshua 5:11 that Joshua ate the grain on the day after the Passover. Let's view an interlinear edition of the Septuagint. And we read in the right-hand corner, and they did eat of the wheat, and of the new at that time. And did you notice that it says wheat and not barley? That gives full linear alignment with fine flour, because the wheat is what fine flour is made of. Yes, they ate the wheat at the day after Passover. Does it seem strange? This Septuagint agrees with many other translations in that Joshua indeed ate grain on the day after the Passover. Even this interlinear of the Greek agrees. A Hebrew interlinear version confirming Joshua ate grain on the day after the Passover. Remember, Hebrew reads right to left, so we're going to go to the right. And they ate the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread, parched grain on this very same day. Now, there's going to be a very astute student here going to recognize this word before I press the next button. There's an extremely important word here, and I hope you can see this. There it is, etzem. And we're going to get, you want to see more, there you find the review from the original Joshua study. Etzem. This is the base bone structure of the plan of salvation. The base bone structure of the plan of salvation. Bone is one of the definitions of etzem. Here is a direct pattern linking to the exact first cycle of the week that YAHusha observed the wave sheaf. This is that word, etzem. This is the pattern, incredible pattern. YAHusha presented himself as the first fruit on the day after the Sabbath. Please reference Leviticus 23, 11, and 15. And this word etzem is the foundation of salvation on the first cycle of the week. This is when Joshua ate the grain. So that way we know the wave sheaf was performed by Joshua on the first day of the week. Direct linkage here. Hence the chain. What command concerning the eating of the grain of the land applies to this situation? Does this same command from Yahuah involve the cycle after the Passover? That would be Abib 15. And what pertinent detail makes Yahuah's grain consumption command so vastly important to calendar timing? I'm going to read this one more time because this is important. What pertinent detail makes Yahuah's grain consumption command so vastly important to calendar timing? Yahuah's eating prohibition command. And you, what? Do not eat. What don't they eat? You do not eat bread, roasted grain, or fresh grain. And the timing of that? Until the same day that you have brought a grain offering to your Elohim. That is a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. No grain of the land whatsoever was to be consumed until they had performed certain obligations for Yahuah. Let's look at it closely. Notice that is past tense. They could not eat grain until something had been done previously. Yahuah's precise timing for the wave sheaf. Speak to the children of Israel, and thou shalt say to them, when ye shall enter into the land which I give you, and reap the harvest of it, then shall ye bring a sheaf, the first fruits of your harvest, to the priest. First fruits. Rashit Ketzir Kim. First cutting of you. Rashit is first, Ketzir is cutting, and Kim is of you. This is your harvest. This is the very first of it. Leviticus 23:11. And he shall lift up the sheaf before Yahuah to be accepted for you. When? On the morrow of the first day, the priest shall lift it up. This is yet another confirmation of Joshua's Passover on a seventh-day Sabbath. Now you look to the right of that box, you're going to see a picture of a sickle. You're going to see that sickle many, many times. Keep note of that sickle. It's a very, very interesting instrument. It has eternal authority, and we're going to find out. Yahuah's precise timing for the wave sheaf continued. And ye shall offer on the day on which ye bring the sheaf a lamb without blemish of a year old, for a whole burnt offering to Yahuah, and its meat offering 2/10 portions of fine flour mingled with oil. It is a sacrifice to Yahuah, a smell of sweet savor to Yahuah, and its drink offering, the 4th part of a hin of wine. Fine flour mingled with oil. That is your bread dough. And it is the first of the harvest, and it is the first for the bread dough. This is definitive calendar lingo. When you see the word fine, very, very, very instructive, that word. Very, very good. Can this offering contain anything else other than the very first of the harvest and the very first bread dough of fine flour for Abib 15? The bread dough offering was made from the 2nd or 3rd cutting. Would it properly qualify or fulfill the statute requirement made by Yahuah? Yes, I have a very, very specific reason for asking this question. Please think Enoch and Zadok. You're going to see this very, very clearly coming up. Succinctly, Enoch and Zadok requires the wave sheaf to be performed on the 26th of Abib. Would bread dough, 11 days old, that would be from Abib 15 to 26, would it be acceptable to Yahuah? In Numbers, there is a straightforward view of the commands concerning the bread dough in Canaan. Check out how this dovetails with the Kodesh pattern found in Leviticus 23, 10 to 15. Numbers 15, verse 19. Then it shall be, when you eat of the bread of the land, that you present a contribution to Yahuah. When you eat. Note those words. Present a cake of what? Of the first of your dough as a contribution. As a contribution of what? Of the threshing floor you present it. Can Enoch separate these commands? Think about this question. You're going to see and illustrated further on why I asked this. Numbers 15:21. Of the first of your dough you are to give to Yahuah a contribution throughout your generations. Bread dough of later batches for wave sheaf contributions would not be accepted. Only a portion from the very primary batch of dough would suffice as an offering to Yahuah. Please note this as it becomes very important in this study. Are later batches acceptable? I'm referencing Enoch and Zadok calendars. Let's look closer at this phrase. There's that sickle again. The first cutting of your harvest, Rashith Ketzir Kim. Setting the stage. The primary focus. Is it possible this special offering required of Yahuah could be brought to him after the Israelites observed the Feast of Passover and after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as claimed by the Enoch and Zadok and Essene calendars? Is this acceptable? We're going to see. Enoch and Zadok's wave sheaf in question. The scriptures tell us that Joshua and Yisrael ate the grain of the land on Abib 15. We see that in Joshua 5:11. Then we see the 7 days of unleavened bread. That takes us from the 15th to the 21st. Joshua harvested the first grain. There's that sickle again. He harvested the first grain on Abib 15. Bread dough was offered. Grain was eaten on Abib 15. The Enoch calendar claims the wave sheaf must be performed on the 26th of Abib. The question, is it acceptable in Yahuah's eyes to separate the first bread dough from the wave sheaf offering? You see that from the 15th to the 26th. The Enoch question emphasized, again, Joshua harvested and ate of the first severed grain on Abib 15. Did Yahuah command that the wave sheaf offering was to trail by 11 full cycles after Joshua harvested and ate the grain of the land on Abib 15? The cycle after the Passover? Again, did Joshua save the first of the bread dough for 11 cycles so he could offer it to Yahuah on Abib 26 as Enoch demands? This is the question. This is what we have to look at, and we need to understand it well and decide if Enoch is authentic, if he is sticking by the scriptures, or if there is severe contamination because he does not abide by the requirements of the statutes. This is our decision, or this is our inquiry today. Why do we keep seeing this picture? Patience. The answer is coming. Let's dig in and look at some definitions for Rashit. We find this same word at the very start of the Hebrew manuscript, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, Rashit, the first. Keep in mind the harvest of wheat upon entering into Canaan and the prohibition of eating grain of any kind until the wave sheaf procedure had been accomplished. The etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language, Rashit, headship, primacy, and that is as in the first cutting. And the root word, Rosh, we see head, chief, leader, top, summit, beginning, division, principle, and foundation. Here's the Hebrew lexicon by John Parkhurst. The root word, Rosh, excuse me, denotes priority or precedence in respect of time, order, place, or dignity, principal part, chief, and most excellent. Excuse me. J. Parkhurst writes, it, Rosh, is said of wisdom, i.e. of the Messiah, and he cites Proverbs 8:22. This word, Rashit, is used in connection with the wave sheaf, which represents YAHusha, for YAHusha was the first fruit, the chief, the most excellent primary fruit from victory over death. The word Rashit then has a rightful, direct connection to the first sheaf, the wave sheaf offering by Joshua upon entering into Canaan. J. Parkhurst continues, as a noun, Rosh, the head of the animals, whether of men, beasts, or birds, because first or highest in place, and on account of these senses therein lodged, and in dignity also. He also writes more on this interesting words, but to summarize it, Rashit takes precedence over all else. Remember, this word Rashit is written in Leviticus 23:10 concerning the offering required by Joshua prior to eating the grain of the land. Remember this. It takes precedence over all else. Again, here's another Hebrew lexicon by W.H. Barker. Rosh, head, top, principal, chief, captain, chief in place, beginning, first, sum, and total. Rashit, beginning, principal, chief, first. And look at that arrow on the left, first fruit. That's a direct connection with our Mashiach. There's another Hebrew lexicon by Gesenius, going down to the pink highlights, or purple highlights, I guess they are, mauve. Highest place or rank, first, foremost, beginning. Now notice this one, the first of its kind, first fruits. Gesenius lexicon describes in detail basically the same information as we have already read concerning Rashit, and provides many scriptural texts. The Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament by Kohler and Baumgartner, the root word Rosh, the head, is explained as being the primary source of intelligence and leadership. Let me read that one more time. Rosh, the head, is the primary source of intelligence and leadership. Does that connect with our Mashiach being the first fruit? Samuel Bagster's Analytical Hebrew and the Chaldee lexicon, the root word Rosh, I'm going to the pink highlights, principle of anything, and this next one, please read this slowly, headstone of corner. This is the root word of Rashit. Rashit, a beginning, former time, former state, the first of its kind in respect to time, rank, and worth, hence firstling. Summary, Rosh and Rashit carry the unmistakable notation of being the primary known entity of its kind. What would happen if that linked directly to our Mashiach? Could we justify that? I sure could. Can we justify that through the sickle? That sickle has eternal authority. Is there a direct link? We're going to wait and see. Alignment reminder. We are still investigating the first fruit, the wave sheaf, the grain offering required of Joshua to perform when? Before they ate the grain of the land. Let's review the second slide, or the next slide from Leviticus 23, before continuing our examination of the Hebrew words. This is a review. Just going to look at it just to recenter us again. Leviticus 23:10. Speak to the children of Israel, and thou shalt say to them, when ye shall enter into the land which I give you, and reap the harvest of it, I'll say that again, and reap the harvest of it, think sickle, then shall ye bring a sheaf, the first fruits of your harvest, to the priest. First fruits, Rashit Ketzir Kim, the first cutting. Now you have been through the definitions of Rashit, and you understand very, very clearly it is the first, the one and only of its kind, the premier cutting. There it is, that sickle again. It just gets in there. Now let's look at the Hebrew word translated as cutting. Samuel Bagster's Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon. A kitzir, to cut down and reap. Kitzir, the Tanakh word, is masculine. Masculine. Interesting. Was YAHusha masculine? Pretty good link there. What is the definition? Fruits cut down. Was YAHusha ever cut down? Harvest. Gesenius Hebrew lexicon. Ketzir. All words starting with kuf tzadi, have the notion of cutting or cutting off. Gesenius lexicon then goes on to list the numerous family of words that start with kuf tzadi. And this is more on Gesenius. Ketzir, reaping, harvest of grain. The lexicon then goes on listing the many times the harvest is referenced throughout the Tanakh. Here's what Parkhurst says from 1762, Ketzir, to cut off. I believe our Mashiach was cut off in the midst of the week. A Hebrew lexicon, W.H. Barker, Ketzir, to cut, shorten, to reap, cut, mow, harvest, cut off. The etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language, Ketzir, harvesting, reaping, harvest time, harvest, cut, grain, bough and branch. Strong's, Ketzir, primitive root, cut down. Summary for Ketzir. All research sources thus far agree that this word designates an action of cutting in some respect. There is now one more word that needs examination. It is the Hebrew word omer that we read in English as sheaf. We need to be certain exactly what type of product Joshua was required to present. Strong's 6016, omer. On your right, going to the highlight, a sheaf. Also an omer as a dry measure, omer and sheaf. H6014, omer, a primitive root, specifically as denominative from H6016. Properly, apparently to heap, figuratively to chastise as if piling blows. Now look at this one. To gather grain, bind sheaves, to make merchandise of. Gesenius Hebrew called the lexicon, omer, to bind closely together. Yell, to bind sheaves together. A Hebrew lexicon by John Parkhurst, omer, go down to the highlight, to gather as corn into sheaves. What does Barker say from Hebrew lexicon? In the pink highlight again, on the right side, to bind the sheaves. And Samuel Bagster's Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon, omer, to bind sheaves. Here's a summary for omer. It is quite apparent that the action necessary is to gather or group the stalks of wheat for the very special offering. Here's an assessment for part number 1. By Hebrew definition, we have determined that Rashit is the prime factor or first entity of its kind. There is nothing which comes prior to it. Read that one more time. There is nothing which comes prior to it. Can we relate that to our Mashiach? Is there anything that came prior to YAHusha? Interesting linkage there. By Hebrew definition, we understand that Ketzir describes the required cutting action for harvesting the grain of the land. And number 3, by Hebrew definition, we realize that omer is the bundling action required to form a sheaf. These are the definitions that pertain directly to this study. Yes, there are other definitions which do not apply here. What is the reason for this close examination into Rashit and Ketzir? The reason is we need to be extremely accurate, beyond our human comprehension accurate, because we need to understand, we need to discern truth. And Yahuah, through the Ruach, will give us that discernment if we ask for it. And we need every bit of that Ruach that we can. Let's continue. We are going to review Leviticus 23:10 once again. Leviticus 23:10. Speak to the children of Israel, and thou shalt say to them, when ye shall enter, let's cross the Jordan, into the land which I give you, that would be Canaan, and reap, that's ketzir, cut off, the harvest of it, ketzir eat, then shall ye bring a sheaf, wheat bundle offering of the first fruits, and that would be the premier cutting of grain of your harvest. To who? To the priest. That would be a premier cutting, the very, very first time that that sickle touched the grain that year. The very first time. Anything less is unacceptable. Are there more witnesses for the requirement to deliver the first cutting of grain to the priest? Charlene, are you happen to be there? Would you like to read these next two slides for me?
Yes, I can certainly do that.
Thank you.
In Deuteronomy 18, verses 3 and 4 from the New American Standard Bible, now this shall be the priest's due from the people, from those who offer a sacrifice, either an ox or a sheep, of which they shall give to the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks and the stomach. You shall give him the first fruits of your grain. Did you hear that? You shall give him the first fruits of your grain, your new wine and your oil, and the first shearing of your sheep. And then in Deuteronomy 26, verses 1 and 2, then it shall be, when you enter the land which Yahuah your Elohim gives you as an inheritance, and you possess it and live in it, that you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground, which you bring in from your land that Yahuah your Elohim gives to you, and you shall put it in a basket, and go to the place where Yahuah your Elohim chooses to establish his name. So what it's saying here is that none of this is done with first fruits until they enter the land. What is the sickle's commission? Well, it has to be reaping. Revelation has some interesting instruction in chapter 14. Verse 14, and I looked, and I saw a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud was one like the son of Adam, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another messenger came out of the dwelling place, crying with a loud voice to the one sitting on the cloud, send your sickle and reap, because the hour has come for you to reap, because the harvest of the earth is ripe. And the one sitting on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another messenger came out of the dwelling place, which is in the heaven, and he too held a sharp sickle. Verse 18, and another messenger came out from the altar, having authority over the fire, and he cried with a loud cry to him, having the sharp sickle, saying, send your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe. And the messenger thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of Elohim. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the bridles of the horses for about 300 kilometers. It's quite a bit of reaping there in Revelation, all to do with a sickle.
Yes, that sickle is pretty incredible. When I say it has an eternal authority, we can see it from these verses clearly. However, I'm saying that the sickle has an eternal authority for another reason. But we're not going to discover it just yet. It might even be in part 2. There's that sickle again. The one on the right is a scythe. Will the first cutting of grain include the dough, which is required prior to creating bread, the cutting, mixing, presenting, and eating sequences. The cutting, the first harvest task, which is the wave sheaf and sacrifice. Leviticus 23:12. And on that day, when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb, a year old, a perfect one, as an ascending offering to Yahuah. Note that wording, ascending offering. Leviticus 23:13, the ascending offering and its grain offering. This is the first bread dough mixing task, hence that sickle once again. 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuah, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering, 1/4 of a hin of wine. This very specific offering was timed, Numbers 15:19. Then it shall be, when you eat of the bread of the land, we're pretty clear on that, that you present a contribution to Yahuah, a grain offering. My question is, we know that Joshua ate grain on Abib 15. Can we see this instruction with Enoch and Zadok? That's a question we need to analyze very, very carefully. It says here, when you eat of the bread of the land, that you present a contribution, a grain offering. There's that sickle again with the sheaf. The bread qualifier. This is number 1. Numbers 15:20. Present a cake of the first of your dough as a contribution. As a contribution of what? Of the threshing floor you present it. That word, or words, threshing floor, is ultra important. We're going to see why. Evidently, it is very important to Yahuah to have the very first batch of wheat flour mixed with oil, which is dough. Notice what the very next text says. Again, of the first of your dough, you are to give to Yahuah a contribution throughout your generations. Is Enoch and Zadok going to be able to accomplish this? A question that we need to consider and we need to get the answer for. Bread qualifier number 2, Numbers 15:20, a contribution of the threshing floor you presented. Why is that important? By stating that the offering must originate from the threshing floor, this clearly indicates a grain product. This positively rules out dough made from manna. And I have heard this many times. Oh, they must have ate manna as the unleavened bread. No, the unleavened bread had to come as a product of the threshing floor. Very, very important. Hence, it cannot be said that Joshua made the dough, which they ate on Abib 15, from manna. Joshua made and ate bread produced from grain dough from the threshing floor. Enoch and Zadok, did you read this qualifier? These statements will be examined thoroughly, and the plot thickens. Bread qualifier number 3, and its meat offering 2/10 portions of fine flour mingled with oil. By requiring fine flour, Yahuah eliminates barley as the grain from which to form the first dough offering. Barley cannot be made into fine flour. Barley makes coarse flour only. So the question I have, Should we be looking to the barley for Passover, to start the year and for Passover? Is it proper that we look to the barley? Again, this is more calendar lingo when we begin to understand it. The wheat was cut off, severed by the sickle. YAHusha was cut off, severed by the evil powers. Can we link that? I can. It was then prepared into bread dough offering to Yahuah. The remainder of the first portion of dough was baked into bread. The scriptures record the Israelites ate it on the self-same day. Yes, I highlight that purposely, for it is Etzem, and it was the day after the Passover, which was Abib 15. You can read that in Joshua 5:11. Why is this point of the first of the harvest, including the freshly cut wave sheaf and the first of the bread dough, being directly emphasized? Because the Enoch Zadok calendars declare the wave sheaf was performed long after Joshua's wave sheaf festival presentation. They claim it was on Abib 26. This is in spite of the scriptures documenting that the Israelites ate the grain of the land on the cycle immediately after the Passover of Abib 15. And remember, they were not allowed to eat the grain until the wave sheaf presentation had been done. This is the whole dilemma with Enoch and Zadok in verses what we see the documentation in the scriptures. Enoch and Zadok calendars are allowed only one statute error to be counted as counterfeit. Section number 2. This section examines the scriptural reasons why the eating of the grain of the land and the action of cutting the wave sheaf cannot be separated into two different dates of the month. What type of activity was prohibited until the wave sheaf, the bread dough, the sacrifices and oblations had been performed first? What activity was prohibited? This is a review. We're going to go back to here and examine this so we understand it. And you what? Do not eat. That is an eating prohibition. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this tonight, remember this: do not eat. Because this is going to become ultra important in another aspect in part 2. Once again, and you what? Do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain. Is there any other types of grain? Bread is prepared, roasted is cooked, and fresh is fresh. It's just been cut. Is there another type? No, I think that's a pretty good blanket coverage on all grain. Do not eat any grain. The timing of this: until the Etzem, the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. And that is a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. There it is, Etzem, the bone structure of salvation. There it is again, imagine that. Yes, Etzem. On the left, you'll see that man with a key. This word is a key to understanding scripture. Etzem is a basic, fundamental, foundational word to salvation and understanding YAHusha's purpose on this earth. YAHusha, the central head intelligence of the fundamental bone structure for salvation. And if you don't quite understand this, go to our first study on Joshua that is on the Covenant Calendar website, and it goes through this fairly clearly. That word, etzem, the definition is a bone structure, and that is the bone structure of salvation, and it is on the first day after the seventh day Sabbath it is the wave sheaf, and it is on first fruits. That is our bone structure of salvation. Nowhere in the scriptures was Joshua commanded to refrain from eating the grain of the land for 11 extra cycles to align with Enoch's wave sheaf on Abib 26. Remember, Abib 26 is the Enoch Zadok wave sheaf claim. The Abib 26 idea simply does not exist in the scriptures. If one desires to observe the wave sheaf on Abib 26, one must go to a separate calendar source other than the scriptures for uninspired authority. Would that be Zadok and the books of Enoch? Just a question. Going to have a sequence review. This is the first witness again. The cutting task, which is the wave sheaf and sacrifice. And on that day, Etzem, when you waved the sheaf, remember Joshua did that on Abib 15, take careful note of the subsequent required actions and the substance that accompany it on the very same day. And you shall prepare a male lamb a year old, a perfect one, as a what? An ascending offering to Yahuah. Who ascended in John 20, verse 17? Is there linkage here? I think so. Leviticus 23:13, and its grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuah, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering, 1/4 of a hin of wine. That same day, Etzem, that is your bone structure. I've talked about that. It is the ascension offering. It is the type, or it is the premier pattern set that needs to be fulfilled. That same day, that is the very day that Joshua cut the sheaf for the wave sheaf. That same day. Is that the day that YAHusha ascended? Do we read that in John 20, verse 17? Did YAHusha, as the antitype, fulfill the type of the Old Testament? Did he fulfill that? Yes, there's incredible linkage with Etzem that same day. Do we have another witness? Numbers again, chapter 15, 17 to 18. This is a second witness. And Yahuah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I bring you. Note, it is just as important to understand exactly what the scriptures do not say as it is to know exactly what they do say. When you come into the land does not mean after you have been settled in the land for a while. Numbers 15:19. And the two interlocked inseparable steps. Then it shall, when you eat of the bread of the land, that you present a contribution to Yahuah. Joshua is recorded as eating bread on Abib 15. With that factor, we know that he presented a contribution to Yahuah. Step 1, when you eat the bread of the land, that you present a contribution to Yahuah. What is that contribution? According to Leviticus 23:13, it is an offering of wheat flour mixed with oil or prepared bread dough. The old grain of the land was already prepared for eating, yet as per instruction in Leviticus 23:14, the old grain of the land was not to be eaten, not until the wave sheaf. The new standing grain harvested with a sickle had been presented before Yahuah by the high priest. Again, the three important categories of this grain consumption restriction. The Israelites were not to eat bread prepared from dough. They were not to eat roasted grain, that would be cooked, new or old grain, and they were not to eat fresh grain, that would be new from standing grain. Not until prior to they were not to eat it prior to the wave sheaf ceremony. And also the offering and oblation presentation must necessarily be accomplished first, prior to eating the grain. With these three descriptions of grain, Yahuah had placed a blanket coverage on the different types of grain not to be eaten. Only after the wave sheaf, with the sacrificial offerings and oblation presentations, only then could the Israelites eat any grain of the land. Enoch, Dead Sea Scrolls, and Zadok. Are you reading this? Are you paying attention? Are you able to accomplish and fulfill these commands with your 364-day fixed feast calendar? They were not to eat the grain of the land until these oblations and sacrifices had been presented. Please note, this factor is poised to pounce in part 2, and it is going to hit Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Zadok very, very hard. Is there any possibility of another type of contribution presented to Yahuah that would not include bread dough and a wave sheaf? Yahuah outlined these set-apart peripheries ultra clearly in Leviticus 23, 9-15. When you come into the land, you do not eat roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. The specific outline of the offerings are written within these verses. There are no other instructions for this first contribution upon entering the land, which could sidestep the eating of grain and presenting a cut wave sheaf at the outset. Why is the cutting and eating of the grain being stressed? Remember that Joshua records the Israelites ate of the stored and roasted grain on the cycle immediately after the Sabbath of Passover. Joshua 5, 10, and 11. Again, Enoch and Zadok, the Essene and Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. Are you paying attention to this documentation? Can you fulfill this documentation with your calendar? Review confirmation and third witness. And the sons of Israel encamp in Gilgal and make their Passover on the 14th day of the month at evening in the plains of Jericho. And they eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow of the Passover, unleavened things and roasted corn in this self-same day. Ultra-specific note, yes, the Israelites were eating the grain of the land on the cycle immediately following the Sabbath Passover. Okay, Sabbath Passover on the 14th. We're going to look at this one more time. This is the Enoch calendar and the Zadok calendar. You've seen they all use the same 364 fixed feast calendar. There is no weekly Sabbath on the 14th cycle of the first or second month of Enoch. There is no 14 here. And yet Joshua is declared and proven solidly by statute that he observed the Passover on a seventh-day Sabbath in the first month. Enoch, Zadok, where is it? No Sabbath Passover on the 14th of the first or second month? Why not? Passover was never honored on the 14th cycle of the third month. That's the first time we see a seventh-day Sabbath on the 14th in their calendars. Does that work? Not by scriptural documentation. Pertinent inquiry at this point. Have you seen thus far any continuity and or alignment with the documentation of the scriptures justifying the following Zadok and Enoch calendar claim? That the Israelites performed the wave sheaf following the Feast of Unleavened Bread on the 26th of Abib? The inquest. The next slide is a witness for the promotion of the Zadok calendar under consideration. And the Enoch calendar timing format is virtually identical. Please be certain that you understand the date of their claim for when the wave sheaf must be performed to accomplish their inclusive calendar specifications. Why? Because this Enoch Zadok calendar date has been compared to the scriptures with Joshua's documentation. See there, they declare in the first month, on the 26th day of the month, that first fruits, the wave sheaf offering, is when it is to occur. And this is a fixed date every year. The wave sheaf was offered on the 26th of the first month. Is that correct, according to Joshua? I can't see it myself. Pertinent inquiry number 2. In the context of the Zadok calendar, if the wave sheaf presentation did indeed follow the Sabbath after their completed week of unleavened bread, what specific condition then must have been met according to Yahuah's statute requirements? I'm going to read this one more time because this is what we're going to see in part 2 coming up. What specific condition then must have been met according to Yahuah's statute requirements? Very, very important. Judging by Yahuah's inspired word, can it be said that Yisrael needed to refrain from eating any and all grain before Abib 26, as claimed by the Zadok date of the wave sheaf presentation? Isn't that what we read in the scriptures? That there could be no grain eaten until the wave sheaf had been presented? But yet we see that Joshua ate the grain on Abib 15. So how does that compare with the Enoch Zadok calendar? And if the Enoch and Zadok calendar, they couldn't eat grain per statute of Yahuah until the wave sheaf of Abib 26, I'm going to leave it right there. I think that is something that we need to think about, and we're going to see that in part number 2 coming up. Will this dilemma be solved in the antitype of our Messiah? Part 1 exposed several errors and counterfeits of Enoch's calendar. Part 2 will address the issues of the Torah's type, YAHusha's antitype. Number 3, Enoch's hunger dilemma. And I'm going to read that one more time. Enoch's hunger dilemma. Why hunger? We're going to see this. Enoch's hunger dilemma over the placement of the wave sheaf. Did Enoch's people have anything to eat for 11 days? How many more errors will be discovered? May you be blessed as you ponder these thoughts. This is all that we have tonight, and I hope you understand it, and I hope that you were blessed.
Well, it's time for questions and comments. There's been a lot of people within Torah to the Tribes and people that have been looking at calendar that have been wondering about Enoch and the Zadok calendars, and there's the Essene calendars as well. They're both basically all from the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is another calendar that comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the lunisolar calendar that is basically kept by the Messianic Jews and most of the Hebrew roots. So basically, in a short research, those are the four main calendars that you will find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But Enoch is one of the closest counterfeits to the covenant calendar right now. But after this presentation, I just wonder what you think. Are you feeling that Enoch has a chance at being the true calendar of Yahuah, or are they scrambling? So we'll just open it up for discussion.
Before we get into the open discussion, Tim, I just want to say thank you, brother, for putting so much interest together. It's something that we're going to want to look at several times. There was, for me, a question that I didn't think to ask. I didn't even think to ask it. So, but some really good stuff in there. Thank you very much for that presentation.
You're very, very welcome. All praise to you for helping me work on this. I highly recommend that you go through that study several times slowly at your own pace, each one of you, because it is so full of details. I didn't get to say all the details. It's a loaded study, and I'm eager to see parts 2 and 3 coming up, because it's going to pull everything together. I said a bunch of things tonight and left some open questions. Parts 2 and 3 will bring it all together.
Very good.
I was wondering about, there was a slide, I think it may have been around 59, when you were talking about Rashit, the fear of Yahweh, like the beginning. You had that. Yes, do you remember how it went? Well, when you were talking about that, it said primary source of intelligence. Do you remember saying that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the primary source of intelligence. So then in Proverbs 15:33, Yahweh's instruction is the fear of Yah. And Proverbs 2:5, understanding the fear of Yahweh. And then Proverbs 9:10, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. So if you had the primary source of intelligence, is the first, is the essence. So that just goes along with all of those. And then Isaiah 33:6, he will be a sure foundation in your times. That's another good one. And then Proverbs 1:7, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. And of course you had the source of all intelligence. So it's Yireh Yahweh Rashita At. It's the beginning of your understanding. It's the beginning of everything. I just love that part.
Okay, Yahuah. That's great. Thank you, Vivian.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian.
And all of that connects to the Festival of First Fruits. And as we have discovered, there's many feast camps that when they celebrate Passover, they just sort of bypass first fruits. They don't really know what they're supposed to do or what it means. It just kind of comes and goes. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, oh, wasn't it first fruits? So Vivian, thanks for those comments, because it has everything to do with YAHusha as the antitype, who fulfills all those wonderful details of first fruits. Because without that, that's kind of the part that finishes that bone structure of our salvation. Of course, there's going to be a second ascension, and then the outpouring of the Ruach on Pentecost. But first fruits is a major cornerstone to all of this. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Sudi, you have your hand raised?
Yes, Tim, good study. But could you bring up slide 73 once?
Slide 73.
Well, there was something on there just as he was changing slides that I was wondering about.
Hang on, Sue. I'll get it up here. I just gotta.
Okay,
What number was it?
73.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, go ahead. Okay. Okay. That at the very last in parentheses, which was Abib 15, it looks like the way you have that place that you're saying Passover was Abib 15.
But I do have it emphasized there after the Passover. Is that not emphasized enough?
Well, it just, okay, after the Passover, which was on Abib 15, it looks for the reader like you're saying the Passover is Abib 15.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Then we can change that. Yeah, we can change that.
Yeah, I just caught it as you were changing slides, but it for somebody just reading it, it looks like you're saying Passover happened on Abib 15.
Yeah, I can see that, Sue. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
That was great. April, thank you, Sue. Great observation. April?
Yeah, I don't know if I have this understood well enough to even ask a question, but my question was on 73 also.
Oh.
Passover is not a Sabbath, but the 15th is a Sabbath, correct?
In the Passover year that Joshua entered Canaan, Passover was on a seventh-day Sabbath, and Abib 15 was the first convocation of unleavened bread on the first day of the week. It was also the wave sheaf day on that very same first convocation of unleavened bread.
Okay, so they go out and they cut the grain, correct?
Yes.
And on that day, are they to make that into dough and make that into bread
Yes.
on the Sabbath?
That is a annual Sabbath, and on annual Sabbaths we are allowed to prepare food for consumption.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
And I believe you'll see that in Exodus 13, I believe.
Okay. And to make that clear for those that might not hear it, let me see if I have this right, Tim. We understand that the seventh-day Sabbath is obviously a Sabbath, and the feast days are also called Sabbaths. But we also recognize that first fruits is always the first day after the weekly Sabbath of Passover. In this case, the weekly Sabbath was on the Shabbat, so the very next day would also be first fruits and the first day of unleavened bread, commencing on the same day, which was a Sunday.
Why is this important, Mario? Why is this important? I'd like anybody that can answer that. Why is it important to know this?
Well, I would say it because it is the steps that Yeshua took, and it was the sequence of events that never changed. It was set in stone, and it has not changed. And if I'm wrong, help me figure it out.
Yes, you're right, April. That is what, when Charlene mentioned about the type and the antitype, the type was set. The type is the pattern that must be fulfilled. This type was set by Joshua, and YAHusha, the lamb, the first fruit, must fulfill the wave sheaf offering of first fruit. He must be the antitype and fulfill that pattern perfectly. That's why it is so important to know what happened with Joshua. We also need to know this because Joshua makes us understand with absolute certainty that the wave sheaf is not to be observed outside of the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Okay, thank you very much.
If that was the case, it was for the Feast of Unleavened, after the weekly Sabbath of Unleavened Bread, that's not an antitype of him coming back or presenting his blood that next Sunday morning. That would be like waiting a whole week to do that, and that's not what he did, right?
Yes, that's correct, Mario. And that is so important for us to understand. YAHusha fulfilled this type, this pattern. He fulfilled it with absolute precision. So much precision, it's far beyond our comprehension.
Died on a Wednesday, was as master of the Shabbat, and on Sunday presented his own blood. Correct?
Yes.
All right. Stacy, You have your hand raised. That was excellent, April. Thank you. Really good question.
Okay, this might be a dumb question. I was about 10 minutes late, so I apologize. What am I missing? If Passover represents his death and first fruits, is first fruits representing the presentation of his blood, or is first fruits the ascension? Because there's 3 days between that, so I'm missing something with that. Does my question make sense?
First fruits is the presentation of YAHusha, who is the premier victor over death. He had victory over death. He presented himself to the Father as the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate flawless sacrifice.
Okay.
If he had have been contaminated in any way, shape, or form, we would not have a Mashiach. When he told Mary, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father," if she had have touched him, he would have been contaminated, and he would not have been accepted before Yahuah. We would not have a first fruit. We would not have a Mashiach. This,
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. So
I get emotional
so
because YAHusha, if he hadn't done this so perfectly, if he hadn't have been absolutely flawless, we would not have salvation. And we have overlooked first fruits for too long. We need to remember it.
Oh, I'm with you there, brother.
Hallelujah.
I'm with you there.
Hallelujah.
So
Indeed.
it's not his resurrection that it represents. It's what you just described. And that's where I was getting the day, the days mixed. Okay, got that.
Yeah. So,
Second thing I wanted to say was just a comment. I noticed that they start the first of the year, the day, life with the sun, the sun, sun on the fourth day, as opposed to the light on the first day. They miss the light, and it totally disregards YAHusha. And it's all the focus is on the sun. I don't know, somebody may have already said that. I was late, but that's the first thing that hit me, is like they're so focused on the sun, they miss the sun.
Yes.
one other thing too, correct me if I'm wrong there too, that YAHusha completed a dual service, meaning on the day of first fruits, it was also, he went into the Holy of Holies, and he died once for all mankind, the final restitution, which also represents Yom Kippur, when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies but once a year. He went into the Holy of Holies on first fruits and presented his own blood. And so to make atonement for mankind, or Kippurim, for all time. Yeah. And we have, April has her hand up, and then Lucian, I noticed that you had your hand raised too. So let's see, April, Lucian, and then, yeah, we'll go in that order. Okay, April, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask Stacy, because it seemed like her question was that she missed the first 10 minutes. So, Stacy, were you aware that this is the entrance into Canaan and not Passover from Egypt? Okay. Thank you. That's all I wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, in the very, very beginning, I think that everybody should have been able to grab hold of that. But in the very beginning, when we were talking about Passover, I think that kind of, would have been a good place also to let people know that we're talking about the Passover of Joshua. Not all Passovers have to be on Shabbat. So, and next we have Lucian. Did I say it right?
My question, it's unmuted, okay. My question was, they eat the grain when they come in the land. on the morrow after, on the Sabbath day on the 15th. So how can they be offering the wave sheaf offering until it's not until Sunday? Because they're eating grain on the 15th, and the wave sheaf is not offered until the next day on the Sunday.
The Passover was on a seventh-day Sabbath.
Right, and they eat grain.
They ate grain on the day after the Passover, which was the first cycle of the week, which was the wave sheaf day. That is according to statute. So Abib 15 was the first day of the week. And that was the first convocation of unleavened bread and the wave sheaf.
What you said that now earlier, you said that the Passover is on the 14th and the 15th was on a Shabbat.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
The 15th was on the first day of the week. The Passover was on a seventh-day Sabbath.
Okay. So on the Sabbath day, they killed and prepared everything for the Passover then.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's all.
Good question. Good question, Lucian.
What was that now?
That was a good question. Thank you.
Okay.
I just would like to add to that, Lucian, that the 15th is the Sabbath of unleavened bread. But if you see the original Joshua study, you'll realize that first fruits took priority. First fruits or the wave sheaf had to be done first, and then they could have the grain to make unleavened bread for their unleavened bread Sabbath and the unleavened bread week. So we didn't really show that tonight because we're doing some things that are connecting to Enoch. But both first fruits and the unleavened bread were on Abib 15. They are sharing that date on a Sunday. But first fruits takes priority all the way to the bank. And that's, just look at the Joshua study. Could I just make a little comment to Stacy about first fruits? Passover can be on any day of the week. It can be on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It can be any day of the week. And you will not always have 3 days and 3 nights, like we do with YAHusha's Passover. But the interesting thing about first fruits is that it was commanded that first fruits is always celebrated on the day after the weekly Sabbath, which is in pagan terms a Sunday. First fruits is always on the first cycle of the week. Always, always, always. It doesn't matter where Passover is. And that was a prophecy that was given that they celebrated for 1,500 plus years before Messiah came to actually fulfill that. So that they were to know that on the first day of the week was when he was going to ascend to heaven. He was going to be the sheaf that was waved and ascended up to heaven to complete that next process of the plan of salvation. So it did not move. It was, and same with Pentecost. Those were two very important. Those are sort of fixed dates. How can I say fixed days, but not dates, because it can be a different date. But Pentecost and first fruits are always on the first day of the week. I don't know if that helps at all.
I wanted to point out too, thank you, Charlene, it does help. You said something too that was very, I don't know if everybody caught it, but there was an order. There's an order of things. And Abba sets the order. And you had said that the order of first fruits must come first before eating of the grain. And in other words, what you're saying is that Abba gets the first fruits of everything. Whether it be our tithe, whether it be our time, whether it be whatever, that first portion belongs to him, because without him giving us the whole portion, we wouldn't have any of it. So if that first portion belongs to him, I thought that was, I don't know if everyone caught what Charlene had said there, but that was very, very, something that we should hold on to in our brain. The first portion always belongs to Yah first. That would be an easy way to remember the order of that thing. Thank you, Charlene. Michelle has her hand raised, and I think that's the only other hand I see raised right now. Michelle, you want to go ahead?
Okay, to further disprove the Zadok Enoch calendars, can you show that they always have Passover beginning on what we call a Tuesday? Is that correct? And the first day of unleavened bread on a Wednesday?
Yes, their calendar is always fixed. And
Right.
that's one of the problems with their calendar, because in the scriptures we prove that Passover was on, as we've just seen, a seventh-day Sabbath in Joshua, and in the account in Egypt, Passover was on a third cycle, which is a Tuesday, and in the crucifixion, Passover was on a fourth cycle, which is the midst of the week or Wednesday. So that blows away the Enoch, Zadok, and Esteen calendars with their fixed dates. That shows you that they do not abide by scriptures.
And it also eliminates the idea, too, of thinking that Abba backpedals in his counting. He counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And he said in verse 5, Genesis 1:5, and there became evening and morning the first day. That's when time began, not on the fourth day. So he doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then start his count over again. You know, he didn't do that. Not only that, but he didn't create the sun and the moon on the fourth day. He made the sun and the moon on the fourth day. He gave them their assignment on the fourth day.
Yes.
That's not the beginning of the count. It's just their assignment was given on the fourth day. You know, so it eliminates that kind of thinking that it has to start on the fourth day when it doesn't.
I'd like to point out too, and we've gone over before, but just point out for anybody here that doesn't understand that, the sun was, as you said, Mario, it was commissioned with light on the fourth day. So light come in the midst of the week. Yahuah made a covenant midst of the week. Midst of the week, he marked that so that there is no misunderstanding. When we hear that YAHusha was to be cut off in the midst of the week, all we have to do is look at creation. We understand when light come in, and we understand when light went out.
Wow. Woo, woo. And we understand that when light came out of the darkness, and the darkness tried not to comprehend it not, but Yahuah placed an order on it and said, this is day and this is night. Light was birthed through, and boy, the fourth day, I had not gotten that till right this second, Tim. Thank you. Hallelujah. Thank you, Abba, for using Tim to share that with me. The fourth day. Wow. I'm glad this is recorded. We got to include this section in the teaching somehow, even if we splice it in. Wow.
Praise Yahuah.
Praise Yahuah.
Mario, I think Lucien had his hand up too, so he had raised it physically, not with the computer.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Thank you, Lucien. Go ahead, brother.